So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to explain to you 1,000 years of history in about 15 minutes. And we're going to start right here because this is the original part of the city. Where we're standing right now is known as Ile de la Cité, or the City Island. It was settled around between 250 and 225 BC by the Parisii tribe. This is a Celtic Iron Age tribe, so they would be culturally Celtic. The reason they settled it on this island is for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is the same. This is an island in the sense, so they had natural protection from enemies. They also had a way to make money because they would charge tolls for passing by. It also, in the Paris area, is where three major rivers intersect: the Marne, the Oise, and the Seine. So it was a very rich place to set up shop. So they lived in relative peace for a couple hundred years until Julius Caesar was campaigning here in France. Back then it was called Gaul. He was around here capturing territory little by little. He came through here, asked the Parisii to help him under the pretense that he would protect them from German barbarians and other Celtic tribes. So they gave him some horses, they gave him some men, and then secretly made a pact with the other Celtic tribes in the area, and they had a big battle. This battle is called the Battle of Lutetia. The Celtic tribe lost, the Romans won, and the Romans move in and start building a city. They call this city Lutetia. So Lutetia gets started. It's a very typical Roman city. If you have an idea of a Roman city in your head, it will be like that. It would be aligned with a north-south road called Caro Maximus, and on the top of the hill, on the left bank, was their forum. So they actually set up their city on the left bank, and the Parisii stayed here. So on top of Mount Sainte Genevieve is where they had their forum. Their forum was a big building about 100 meters long. In it you had a temple, you had a basilica for civic meetings, and you also had a portico with shops in it. They also had Roman baths. They also built a big arena where they would have gladiator matches, and became a pretty civilized Roman enclave. A couple of important things that the Romans did bring to the area. They brought their civilization, so with their civilization they brought aqueducts, so they brought water into the city and throughout Gaul. They also brought roads. All roads lead to Rome, ever hear that? So all the roads left here to go to Rome, but more importantly they brought wine and olive oil. So this is pretty big for French culture, and the Romans are the reason that the French have grapes and wine. So the Romans settle in. They're doing pretty good. Meanwhile, this other guy gets pretty big. You might have heard of him. His name's Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was a Jewish preacher who walked around, got a lot of followers, and then died. So after he died, he became a religious figure. People thought he was God. He started walking around, so people started following him, and then some of these people didn't like these followers, so they started getting persecuted. Anyway, by about 250 AD, one of his followers, the first one in Paris, was a man named Denny. Denny arrived, starts converting people to Christianity. It wasn't until he was 93 that the Romans finally got sick of this. They actually dragged him and two of his buddies to the base of Mount Mercury and asked him to renounce his God and swear allegiance to the Emperor of Rome. He refused. They decapitated the three guys, and it is said, legend has it, that Saint Denis picked up his head from the ground, washed it off in a nearby stream, and then walked 6,000 paces north to where he finally fell. And where he fell is where they buried him, and where they buried him is where they built the first church in Paris. This church will later turn into the Basilica of Saint Denis, and it's where 70 French kings are buried. So Christianity has arrived in Paris by 250. By the early 4th century, by the early 300s, Constantine the Great has converted to Christianity himself, making it the de facto religion of the Roman Empire. By 346, Paris has its first bishop, and by the end of the 4th century, you have your first church, first cathedral in Paris. So Christianity is getting there. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, as Christianity grows, the Roman Empire is getting weaker and weaker. Now, there are a lot of competing theories of why the Roman Empire was weakening, but one of the main theories is that the Romans had lost their civic virtue. They lost the reason that they lost their belief in the Roman Empire. So you had basically Roman generals all over the empire, and these Roman generals had gotten fat on the wealth and success, and they no longer wanted to live a militaristic lifestyle. So what they did is they would hire mercenaries and train them, and then eventually these mercenaries became better generals than them and ended up defeating them in battles. These mercenaries a lot of times were leaders of German tribes. So as the Roman Empire was crumbling, Germanic tribes were starting to cross the Rhine and conquer a lot of the area and taking it from the Romans, so it started getting very spotty. By 486, Clovis, the king of the Salian Franks, defeats the Romans and makes his capital here in Paris. He is successful at sending out men and capturing other parts, and he actually will unite Gaul under one kingdom, the kingdom of the Franks. Now, these aren't French people yet. It's important to note that the Franks will be the ancestors of many Germanic traditions, not just the French. So this group in particular, the Salian Franks, they establish themselves here. They are known as the Merovingians. That's a line of kings in France. It's not that important. I don't want to confuse. So anyway, the important thing to remember about Clovis is actually that he united the kingdom for the first time. Also, another really important thing about Clovis is that he converts to Christianity, to Catholicism, making a direct connection early on to the Pope in Rome. And he also creates a law code called Salic law, which will be important in the rest of the history of France, because Salic law said that only a male heir can inherit the throne, and all the kings up until the Bourbons are going to refer to this and use this for their advantage. So, after Clovis dies, the kingdom is divided up, because the law said that it goes to a male heir, but it didn't say it goes to the oldest male heir, so it actually gets divided up between his 4 sons, and they will battle each other, and it's going to be real messy. It won't get better until the Merovingians lose power and another monarch group takes over, the Carolingians. I'm not going to get into too much detail of them, but Charlemagne, the guy in the statue back there, he was one of these Carolingians. He became the first Holy Roman Empire, but that's another discussion for another day. Where I want to get up to in the story is about the 800s. The Carolingian dynasty was in power at that time, but this power will be threatened by a group of men known as the Vikings. It's really impossible not to talk about the Vikings when you're talking about French history. The Vikings play a pretty important part. So by 845 AD, 120 longboats with 30 oarsmen, decorated like black terrifying dragons, float down the Seine for the first time. What they find is an unsuspecting village here full of cathedrals and monasteries that are full of gold and full of monks and priests that don't want to fight. So they easily come in here and take a lot of stuff. It was so successful that these Vikings come again and again. They come so much that eventually the people of Paris just pay them not to take things and not to come in and destroy things. So they get really comfortable with that. Who were the Vikings? They were groups of men from Scandinavia. Scandinavia is a place that doesn't have a lot of arable land, so they don't really want to stay there. I know popular culture has this idea that these guys were complete barbarians. Yes, at the beginning they did not believe in Christ, but they later adopted him. They also didn't have horns on their helmets. They did do a lot of raping and pillaging and razing, but they also were great at trading and also good businessmen. They were also amazing sailors. They went all the way to Kiev, all the way to Constantinople. They were actually the first Europeans to actually make it to North America, and they made it without a compass. So these guys were pretty smart. But yeah, they got comfortable. They kept coming down the Seine and taking stuff from Paris, until finally, when they came in 885, they came with more men, 30,000, and 1,200 longboats this time. And they floated down the Seine, and they came in and they demanded their money from the leader of the city. His name was Count Odo. And they said, "Count Odo, we want our money." And Count Odo said, "No, you can't have this. You are going to have to take it from us." And what they found was a totally different place. The Parisians had made a big wood wall around the city. They actually made a bridge on each side of the Ile de la Cité, and they also had fortified heavily. So these Vikings laid siege. They basically were catapulting stuff, catapulting fireballs, catapulting heavy rocks, while the Parisians were dumping hot wax on them. So they laid siege, and it was a real stalemate. They settled on the right bank. They made camp. They got so frustrated that half of them went off and started pillaging and attacking other villages. Well, Count Odo thought this was a great opportunity to send a messenger to the king, who was actually in the south of France. He sends a message to Charles the Fat. Charles the Fat says, "Okay, I'll come and help," but it takes him months to come. And when he does come, he goes to the Vikings and he says, "Just give me some money and you guys can go." And the Vikings say, "Okay," and they give him money. Of course, all the Parisians are mad because they want vengeance. They want retribution. And so the Vikings pass by Paris. They just paid their way out to Charles the Fat, and they sacked Burgundy. And on their way back, Count Odo doesn't allow them to pass through the water. He makes them walk their boats around. So then the Vikings kind of settle up into Normandy. They get kind of cozy up there. And finally, in 911, the Parisians and the Vikings come to a mutual agreement about how they're going to figure out their problem. What they do is, the king at the time says, "Okay, Vikings," their leader was Rollo. They said, "Okay, Rollo, how about we make you a vassal of the King of France, and we give you a duchy, and so you become the Duke of Normandy, and that way you don't attack us anymore, and you protect us from your other friends, your other Viking friends, from coming down the Seine." So he says, "Okay." So now the Vikings are settled in there. They become the Normans, or Norsemen, or Northmen. That's the etymology of the word Normandy. And so they settle in. They stay for a couple hundred years. And a couple hundred years later, one of their descendants, William the Bastard, becomes fascinated with Saxon England, and he decides that he's going to invade it. So in 1066, he leads a bunch of Normans across the English Channel, and they successfully invade England, winning the Battle of Hastings. And William the Bastard becomes William the Conqueror. He becomes the King of England, and that is going to create some interesting conflicts in the future. It'll also have an effect on us right now, because a lot of French made it into English this way, because actually it was the French was the language of the court in England for about 300 or 400 years, and so we have a lot of French in English. English nowadays. I've heard 38%. I'm not sure if that's the exact number, but there is a lot, and that is also what makes it much easier for me to come here and start learning French, because I already know a lot, and so do you. So don't think it's too hard to learn French. You've already got a lot inside of you. So that brings us up to 1066. Now I want to move the group over and give it a better angle of the church. I'm going to talk a little bit about Notre Dame, a little bit about the history, a little bit about what to look at. So let's move on over here.